Hello and good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar, Best Practices for Security Analytics and Monitoring of Android Devices. First, some notes. Everyone is on mute today. The presentation is being recorded, so a replay link and a copy of the slides will be emailed after the webinar. The webinar is hosted today by Brett Cooper and Patrick McGlynn. Brett is the founding partner of BlueFletch and also has been in the tech and mobility industry for over 20 years with companies like Coca-Cola and Accenture. Patrick is a well-known mobility expert and manager of systems engineering at BlueFletch. Thank you again for joining us, and I'll hand it over to Brett and Patrick.
Hello and welcome to the BlueFletch webinar on security analytics and monitoring for Android devices. Today I'm joined by Patrick McGlynn from BlueFletch. Patrick and I will be talking about security profiles, monitoring, and diving into what you should and shouldn't be doing on your Android devices. To frame this, we recently got a question from one of our clients around what should they be monitoring for their Android devices. They have tens of thousands of Android devices, and their security team was specifically asking them around what are the areas or the features of functionality that they should be monitoring. So we went through a list of what we've been doing for the last decade and pulled together some of the best practices here, and we'll cover that here with you over the next couple minutes. Patrick, I guess before we get started, maybe you could talk a little bit about your thoughts on security info or sec info and data related to these devices.
Yeah, sure. People are using these devices every day, and there's a lot of events and things that happen on these devices. And the collection of those events and that data and log data that comes off the device is really valuable from a security perspective to understand not only what people are doing on the device, but also, things that they shouldn't be doing on the device. Security event and information management as a field really is all about collecting that data, analyzing it real time, understanding if there's any outliers or, things that deviate from the normal desired usage of these devices, and then being able to take appropriate action quickly and really mitigate the risk and reduce any issues that might result from those security breaches. And what's cool about this field, I think, is it's also, one of those few areas where AI technology is really applicable here. Being able to analyze high volume of events and information and understanding and picking out those outliers is a great application of AI to help identify where those risks might be. I've been working in this industry for probably 8 or 9 years now, but definitely don't have as much experience as you, Brett. So I was hoping maybe you could provide us a little background and context of where your learnings and experience in this field have come from.
Yeah, contextually, there's a lot there. 15 years ago, I started BlueFletch with Richard, our CEO, my partner, and before that, we worked for a separate company doing app development and deployment. We were managing tens of thousands of Windows CE devices. And before that, I was doing security auditing. So none of this is new. It's just how we think about it for Android. Android has really become the predominant software solution for rugged and shared devices in the enterprise. And so a lot of this learning has come from deployments of 40,000, 50,000 devices. And a lot of it's not security focused initially, but it was really focused around how do we have a smooth rollout? How do we manage all this huge number of devices out in the field? And how do we, on the end of that, how do we actually keep them secure and safe? Because, after a couple months of a new shiny device being out in production, you're always going to have somebody who, whether it's an employee or a bad actor, try to get into those devices and do something wrong with them. So it's a lot of those learnings that we've built out. And a lot of it has also informed how BlueFletch has developed some of our tools specifically around securing and managing those shared devices in the workplace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, never an afterthought, always on the front of our mind for sure. And built a lot of tools around that ourselves. And I guess speaking of tools, we thought we'd maybe do a quick overview of some of those different tools out there for analytics and monitoring, and things that we see pretty common across the enterprise for for being able to quickly plug and play and get going. So first up, we have collection. So kind of the origin of event management and monitoring is first you have to have all those events being collected somewhere and being sent somewhere. So for the collection side, I guess we can go through what some of the tools we've seen out there.
Yeah, I think the first one to start out with, this is probably a pitch for BlueFletch, but we do include a support agent with our BlueFletch enterprise tool set. So that's been something I think we started working on that around 2015, but it was really informed by a lot of experiences we had, even back to the early 2000s when Richard and I do Windows CE work, but really thinking through having good data to help troubleshoot issues faster. Because we're building mobile apps, and as the mobile app developer, you always get blamed for every problem, whether it's a network problem, whether it's a security problem, whether it's a config problem. So we built it for that, and it's really focused on a tool that sits on a device that allows you to troubleshoot and find issues. And it's also a good tool from a standpoint of we're agnostic. We work on any OEM device. We can send data to any backend or data lake, which you're going to talk about here in a second. I think for us, it's helped us, definitely saved our hide a lot when we've worked on these complex projects where there's a misconfiguration out there, or there's a problem out in the field that has been there and nobody spotted it. And as soon as you start putting out mobile devices, things go sideways or haywire. Yeah.
And just real quick on that, the way we did build that tool is very much event driven. So anytime there is an event, which can be defined as like a reboot of the device, changing Wi-Fi networks, launching an application, all those events trigger different reports up. So, you can really hone in on exactly what you're looking for. You can view kind of almost that breadcrumb really of what's happening on a device as you follow those events along. So we've built it really to support this method for event monitoring. But I know there are some other tools out there. I can cover those real quick as well. So from the Android OEMs in the rugged space, Zebra has their Visibility IQ product. Honeywell has their OpIntel product, and those tools were originally designed, I think, to run specifically on those OEMs hardware. I believe they've started to try to push into other endpoint support as well. So those two OEMs do have some features. I believe it is not freeware. I think it's a little bit of a premium tagged on.
Yeah, and I think those are really good tools. If you're just specific to one OEM, definitely take a look at those tools. I know, especially I've done some work with Zebra, and there's some additional data they provide, especially things around scanning and things that are happening on the device that you can't get with some other analytics tools. So if you're using one of those stacks, definitely take a look at it.
Yeah, and I think even data around like media levels and stuff for printers. So yeah, they might be able to go a little deeper into their own hardware with that.
Yep. What else you got?
So we've seen a lot of companies actually just start creating logs themselves from all their application events. So there's multiple ways to get those logs off the device. Our BlueFletch support agent has, pretty good rails to be a conduit to pass those logs onto your data lake for you and simplify that connection string. So we do see, companies getting more and more familiar with actually creating helpful and beneficial logging in their apps to understand what's being used. And then definitely from the EMM and MDM side, all those big players, they have tools for that as well. SOTI calls it their X-Site platform. Workspace ONE has their intelligence platform, and Avanti Neurons has this all built in as well. And similar concept, they're already managing these devices, so they're going to try to pull as much data off of them as they can. It's really there's a lot of different options out there. It's definitely good to see what you guys already have available at your disposal, see if it's going to fit your needs, and then address to see if there's any other tools that would be better suited. And then
Yeah.
I'm not super familiar with the LMS, Brett. Maybe you could touch on that one.
B2M is a company out of the UK, and they've been in this game for a while, so they do a really good job on data collection for rugged devices. So they have a tool called LMS, which is worth taking a look at too if you're looking at different tools and options out there. And they're also one that I think they started out being Motorola or Zebra specific, and now they're pretty agnostic across different threads.
Nice, cool. So now that you've collected all these events and logs and activities on a device, I guess you need somewhere to push and put those events and store those for analysis, right?
I mean, you can just put it all in text files and scan through it, right?
Yeah.
Grep.
No problem.
What's the greps and stuff?
No, but really, there are a number of reporting tools and dashboards out there for sending this data. People call them data lakes or repositories, anything like that.
You're talking about my favorite tool.
Which one?
Splunk.
Yeah, I love Splunk.
I'm Splunk all day.
Yeah, it's pretty slick. If you guys haven't seen it, they've got their own query language that indexes the data extremely quickly. It handles unformatted data, raw data very well. This is actually pretty common across servers and systems already, but being able to have endpoints like Android also reporting into Splunk is a great tool because Splunk has a lot of nice features for dashboarding, building your KPIs, setting up alerts, and all that.
They also have cool
stuff.
components around consolidators. So if you have different sites, you can have a consolidator to site, and with Splunk forwarders, where if you have 20 servers in one site, they can all go to one forwarder in a location, which helps bring down some of your costs around data transfer, which is not as much of an issue now as it was 10 or 15 years ago. But it's definitely still, it makes it nice and fast.
Yep. And just again, little sales pitch on BlueFletch. We also built our support agent to forward directly to Splunk as well. You can use our GCP backend for that, reporting layer, or we can pipe that data to Splunk to kind of fit into what your organization is doing. We actually really can support any HTTP endpoint to send data to. So if you guys have something else out there, I know we've looked at New Relic, Syslog, NG, a few others, and we can support those models as well. Databricks is one I've heard of. I think that's an Apache license tool, but it's gotten pretty popular. And then Power BI for all those Microsoft shops out there, another great tool for building your dashboards and your reports.
Yeah, I think if you're an Azure shop and you already get that out of the box, and it's as you start dumping data in there, it gets expensive, but it's easy to test with, especially as you're getting set up and start trying to figure things out.
Yep. And then so we've got collecting events, we've got reporting of those events. Being proactive with that and actually alerting on when there are issues or security concerns is kind of the last step of what's needed for this event monitoring and analytics pieces. So, alerting doesn't really need to be some super complicated Rube Goldberg machine. Really being able to send a message out quickly is probably the most important concept here. So you're able to quickly take action and find resolution. So that's really included, we've found, with most off-the-shelf systems, sending an email, text alerts, Slack integration, or Teams channels. I don't know, Brett, I guess you still carry a pager, right?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely got the pager. I'm like a doctor. I go to the bar with the pager all the time. I think that the important thing on reporting, though, is make sure you set the volume of messages or severity of messages accordingly. I definitely had one client I worked with, and they had the reporting cranked all the way up. So if you were set up on one of their monitoring systems, you would get 500 or 600 emails a day. At which point, people stop paying attention to them. That just goes in. They create a filter in the email and automatically goes into an inbox that says "Don't read." Right. So really think through your posture of what gets reported on versus what doesn't, or do you have like daily consolidation reports? And I think this goes back to Patrick's point earlier on, if you start looking at AI and ML applying to this, then which is in some of these newer tools that he mentioned, you can actually filter out things that aren't important or duplicate and really narrow down to here's the essence of what you should be paying attention to or looking into.
Yeah, when I was doing a little research for this podcast, one of the things they called out was make it part of your practice to identify false positives and try to clean those up, because too much noise, it's impossible to, find the issues that you're looking for. So that's good feedback there.
100%. All right. So you got collection, you got reporting, you got alerting. So those are the key areas from a tooling standpoint. Now we're going to shift gears and talk about specifically the things you should be looking for, that we think we should be looking for in, and this is contextually framed around Android devices. So, and I guess, speaking of context, from a context standpoint, do you want to talk about, what are the things you look for, Patrick, or what are the areas where you're, before we hop into specific areas, like what are the general themes that you're thinking through?
Yeah, we talked a little bit about this, but things that are out of the ordinary, things that are outliers, things that, stick up that need to be addressed. So that can be around known security compromises, meaning people are on an unapproved network or have unapproved apps installed, but it's also a lot of unknown things. So, being able to use AI again is a great tool to find those outliers, things that just really shouldn't be there, don't make sense. And it's hard for a human to do that in real time with, thousands and thousands of endpoints, but a great use of technology there. And things that just, violate rules. So there's a lot of compliance rules out there, either through your, identity providers and your access management tools, like, enforcing MFA or not, password resets, and things that violate those obviously can be red flags. Not always, but definitely can be. So really, that's sort of the core of what you're looking for. How you go about finding that is, there's a lot of different areas and different things to look at to identify what shouldn't be happening. So I think we're going to try to talk about some of those buckets and some of those things that we've focused on in our years of looking at endpoints.
Yeah, and for me, I think one of the thing too, general theme, is to think about known security compromises. So if I know here's like a general compromise I see, look for the things that are related to those, and we'll touch on a couple of those buckets here in a second. But an example I think of is like if there's a known vulnerability for an OS version, and you have 20,000 devices that have been upgraded, but you have like 3 that for some reason won't upgrade and have that compromised version, definitely dive into those and take a look at it. That's a good example there.
Yep.
All right, so shifting gears and actually talking about those big 3 buckets. The first one is usage anomalies. And Patrick, I know this is probably another pitch for some stuff that you deploy a lot from BlueFletch, but you want to talk about some of these or start out talking about some of these?
Yeah, definitely. So we offer a lockdown launcher for Android that provides a single sign-on component. So that allows us to understand who is using a device and who might have checked that device out for their shift. So that opens up a lot of user-based reporting and usage reporting. So we can see, failed login attempts, meaning they're, maybe brute force trying to enter passwords over and over and over. And there's no rules around forcing a password reset after a certain number of incorrect attempts. Obviously a big red flag there. Seeing that a user, maybe that's part of a workforce group using applications that are reserved for managers or for admins. Again, that can be a big red flag around device usage. Using apps they may normally don't use, things that are outside the norm for them. So, they come in on the workday, usually they're using 1 or 2 apps all day. All of a sudden they're using 12 different applications and clicking around. Maybe someone else is on that device and is looking for vulnerabilities. And with that as well, checking in from different sites, being in different locations, and usually conditional access policies can catch things like this, but Not always, especially if they are, an approved user and someone has maybe found, their credentials written down on a piece of paper and is able to log in on their behalf. Those type of things are definitely flags we want to capture and associate that with a user so that we can understand that maybe that user is responsible or maybe not, but they can hopefully assist in understanding, what they were actually trying to do.
Yeah. On that note, another thing, not just users, but also devices at different sites. I know we've seen this in the past where most of the time it's not gross negligence, but there'll be different facilities, and a facility will have workers that work across both, and they'll steal devices from one and use it in the other facility, which is typically not approved. But we've definitely found that. I think one client had a couple hundred devices that were moving around, but it is something we commonly see, that devices are used in the wrong place, and most of the time it's not a security breach; it's an operational problem, but it can also be a security problem as well.
Yeah, missing configurations or and then more on that device side as well. Peripherals can be a big security risk, pairing with Bluetooth devices that can transfer data, or really just unapproved Bluetooth devices for printing, things of that nature. Being able to report on all those pairing activities is super beneficial, as well as any USB connections or, plugging a device into a computer. That's probably the last thing that security teams want to hear is happening. But, being able to actually understand when that happens is a lot better than not. So the more information, the better is probably an overarching concept here. There's going to be a lot of things, 99% of the events you see are probably okay and fine, but being able to identify those weird one-offs is super valuable for nipping it in the bud, any issues that come up.
Yeah, the USB one's interesting. I think with Android specifically, it's just looking to see if ADB is enabled and if it's connected to machines. That's a good way to ferret out if a device is not supposed to be, it is trying to get data pulled off of it. I feel like the USB one always reminds me of the uranium enriching facility in Iran, where the U.S. was dropping USB keys, and that's how they hacked into that facility. But it's definitely going to be a issue. It's historically been an issue on laptops, but it can also be a problem on Android devices.
I agree. I think it's definitely going to be an issue, especially now that, like the EU wants to push for USB-C on all devices. Previously, you could have proprietary USB cables, but potentially that's going to be a thing of the past with USB-C. So we're seeing a lot of devices with USB-C ports on them now.
Oh, yeah, definitely. So the next area, Patrick, next bucket, it's bucket 2, was configuration or compliance anomalies. You want to tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, traditionally we see the MDM or EMM probably be responsible for this, for setting up, the configuration and ensuring a device is compliant with the proper applications and files on there. But oftentimes what's actually true and what's actually on a device might not match what that EMM or MDM says. And back to, earlier this podcast, one of the reasons we built support application was to prove that out and to actually have the endpoint tell us what is on the device versus relying on the management tool. So understanding that, making sure devices are compliant, trying to identify if there's apps that shouldn't be on there. So if someone has installed the YouTube app for some reason, being able to figure that out quickly, seeing what devices are on the wrong lifeguard or security patch or operating system version. There's a lot of things that, there's a lot of ways where a device can deviate from being on the main line of compliant. So different permissions, different accessibility settings, different keyboards being installed. So
can you talk about accessibility a little more? Like, describe what that means for folks who aren't as familiar with those settings.
Yeah. Okay. So accessibility is really a tool that was brought for, helping people with impairments, being, blind or not having good vision, the ability to read out what's on a screen or to enter text for you on your behalf. So some great tools there, but they could definitely be used for nefarious reasons. So you can use that to actually record key presses and see what someone's entering in a keyboard, or view and actually read text on a screen. So those type of applications, again, they were built for good reasons, but if there's going to be, a way to exploit a system, then bad actors are probably going to go and try to find out how to do that. So there can be some really good uses of accessibility, but also definitely some ways to get sensitive data off of devices by using those same permissions. And Android makes it difficult to actually enable those. Usually it has to be enabled by an end user. However, if you are, an advanced hacker or Android coder, you could probably figure out how to get through the system and turn that on.
Yeah, and your note on custom keyboards, can you talk about that also? Why that's a thing?
Yeah, so there's a lot of keyboards out there. Actually, you don't have to just use the standard Android keyboard that your device comes with. And so we see organizations look for, keyboards that are pared down, have very simple functionality, and they might even go to the Google Play Store to find those. Well, we don't really know what's in that code base. That keyboard is obviously going to be capturing any keystroke and entry into into the virtual keyboard. So when you enter your password, for example, you could definitely just be saving that off somewhere that could be sent somewhere and stored somewhere else. So making sure that it's, an approved keyboard, either that's from a trusted vendor, developed internally, or, something that is offered by Google, and understanding if there's, something on there that's not. So yeah, that kind of falls in line with the wrong versions of software, apps, bad apps that shouldn't be on there. Understanding if one device out of 100 has a different keyboard, that's where we need to go look first.
Yeah, I think the software version is another one too. Like, especially if you have, like I said earlier, if everybody's on a newer version of the MDM and this one client is on your version that's 3 versions back, that's worth looking into. Maybe somebody who is keeping it, forcing it not to upgrade, to exploit a vulnerability in an older piece of software that's been fixed.
Yep.
All right, what's next on your list of configuration settings?
Okay. So certificates being installed on a device. So this is a big one, especially with root certs that are being installed and not trusted. Android has gotten a lot better with this in recent years, but you could technically install a non-trusted root certificate on your device and then bypass a lot of like HTTPS protocol and other protocols to go to improper websites and fake a user out thinking it's something that's trusted.
Yeah, or to go through a proxy and capture data. We'll touch on that here in a second.
Yep.
What about device reboots and restarts? Can you talk about that? I know that's something that we've seen that's correlated to a bunch of issues.
Yeah, so rebooting a device, there's actually a couple workarounds to not workarounds, rather almost backdoors to get into like the recovery mode of Android. So it could be someone looking to try to get into that recovery mode to change the operating system on the device, or even reset the device and use it for different purposes, or basically unenroll it from your EMM, or even put it into like a bootload style where you could potentially mount it as like an external hard drive and try to pull files off while the operating system is not running. So, being able to identify if there's a lot of device reboots, not necessarily an issue, but definitely something that you might want to go dig a little bit deeper into. And we've seen people do this nightly as just a practice to clean up devices. So again, not always an issue to reboot a device, but anything that's excessive, anything that's an outlier, definitely probably worth a second look.
Yeah,
And then
I think even operationally, that's a good one too to look at. I remember one time there was a patch from an OEM, and it got deployed to a site, and we started looking at analytics. We saw that all the devices were rebooting. I want to say probably 20 times a day. Nobody had reported anything to the help desk, so I actually called the site and asked them if everything was going well. The guy's like, "Yeah, the devices are great." And I was like, "You have any issues with them rebooting?" He goes, "Oh, they reboot once an hour." And I was like, "Did we call the help desk?" Guy goes, "Oh, I thought I was supposed to do that."
Oh man.
So yeah, it's. I mean, analytics, they're not only valuable from the security side, but operationally, it can definitely eliminate a lot of waste in your organization from that aspect.
That's a great point. We haven't really talked about that much, but there is a lot of value to this data that we're talking about today, not just from the security side.
Yeah. So the next bucket, and we sort of touched on this before, but network anomalies, which I feel like there's a lot of network settings that can go awry, and not just intentionally going bad, but things that can be misconfigured malignantly or can misconfigured accidentally. But you want to talk about your list there, Patrick?
Yeah, sure. The first one is just devices on an unapproved network. That's obviously a issue if you have devices that are connecting to someone's personal home network or a hotspot on their cell phone. Could even be a customer in the store that's walked in and has a hotspot that's faking out your production networks. That's probably the easiest thing to spot. We've definitely come across a lot of devices from our customers that have saved Wi-Fi profiles that shouldn't be there. And, you can definitely remediate that, but being able to prevent that is, definitely another area, probably for a different topic around lockdown, but definitely one of the biggest issues around network anomalies. Also, heavy usage of a browser. Most likely this device is going to be running some native apps or some web apps. But if someone's, just browsing different websites heavily throughout the day, probably something that needs to be addressed. Either they're not doing their job or they're basically trying to push the boundaries of what they can and can't do on the device. Turning on the device as a hotspot can be an issue as well. Because that can then bring another endpoint, like a personal device, into the network if that's enabled. Again, hopefully your devices are locked down either through your EMM or a launcher like BlueFletch to prevent this. But these things do happen, and we have seen them out there. VPN, if you're VPNing on a device, either you're probably a remote worker or you are looking to, bypass your proxy or your security settings from your network. So you're looking to get outside of what your network team is trying to enforce. Not always a bad thing, again, but could be. And then proxies as well, trying to bypass a proxy, which can be a big issue because proxies are what are responsible for really controlling what you can and can't access as far as websites and network usage.
Yeah, I think also on proxies, you flip that around. If you can go through a proxy from a device, you can actually start sniffing some of the traffic off of it, especially if you have the ability to install root certs that are the wrong ones. You can actually have non-SSL or SSL traffic you're decrypting, which is could get pretty messy pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's true. And that's almost, I think, how some of the network sniffing we do when we're doing analysis works. So you're basically setting up a middleman proxy that's going to sniff all that out. But, that's when we're trying to understand if there are network issues, not trying to pull data off a device per se.
Yeah, definitely something an end user should not be doing.
Yeah. And then unsecured connections. So, browsing untrusted websites, things that have expired certificates, things that, are still running HTTP or, FTP servers, things like that, should not be used. You could probably pretty much say that as a blanket rule.
Yeah, and I think we had one that we missed. It sort of falls under the heavy usage, but I think it was memory and capacity issues. There's another one. Can you talk a bit about that and why that might be a red flag in certain situations?
Yeah, I mean, I think you know, there's just, memory issues means you've got an issue on your device. Either applications are running poorly and leaking memory, or there's something else that's probably, trying to intercept any type of traffic on the device. Maybe Brett, this is probably actually something you could talk a little bit more about.
Yeah, I mean, the specific use cases I think of is a application is downloading things and filling space up. Or the other thing I've seen too is where people will go turn on a logging tool. So like on a Zebra device, RX Logger is a very valuable tool, but
Yep.
RX Logger also, it logs everything, so you can see everything that's going on the device, and it can fill up an SD card or memory space pretty quickly, and you pull that off and really start trying to figure out what's going on. Some app developers are sloppy around what they put into their log statements. I've definitely seen passwords and things like that before, so it's it can get a little dicey there if you're not if people are able to get to the low level logs.
Yeah, and downloading files, probably another thing worth talking about as well. So, some organizations allow you to download PDFs or time cards or different files. If you're actually not cleaning those files up, that can be a huge issue. One, you're going to fill up memory, but two, you're going to have potentially private information that can be accessed by a user that didn't download those. If someone downloaded their pay stub, for example, you would never want the next user on that device to be able to view that. So understanding what's being downloaded is, definitely something that should be analyzed if it's allowed at all.
Yeah. So those are the big three buckets. You got usage, configuration, compliance anomalies, and network anomalies. So now that everybody's been informed, how do they get started, Patrick? What are your go in the world and make logging happen? What would you recommend?
Yeah, so similar concept to how we approach a lot of projects here is don't try to boil the ocean with, your first attempt. Really try to start a manageable task. And so our recommendations for that is start focusing first on the endpoints that maybe have the highest risk profile. So if you're doing mobile payments and you have PCI compliant devices, let's focus on those first. Devices that might be processing PII data, let's look at those first and understanding really where the biggest risk potential is, and try to start building our rules and our logging to go around that. So, look for really data that you already have coming off devices. So if you already have logs from tools or you already have EMM, let's start there. See if those tools have what you need. Don't worry if it's not really relevant to your business. Again, there's probably going to be way too much noise out there to, that you're not going to need to worry about. That's okay. There's tools to help you sift through that all. So tools, find a reporting system that works for you. Even an Excel file is probably a fine start. Just being able to analyze, put up, charts, find trends is really the minimum of what you need just to start identifying where anomalies and issues might be. So you can do that with Excel and pivot tables, or you can do that with Splunk and using some AI tools to help identify those outliers. And then finally, probably maybe most important is actually knowing what to do when you find these issues. So what is your escalation plan? Who are you going to take this to? How are you going to respond to it? Do you have, security experts on your team that can help address these issues along the way? So I think those are some of the big foundation points to start with. And then you can start building on that to figure out, what's missing, how we can add additional data in, how we can start filling in these gaps, and really start building out and maturing that event monitoring process.
Yeah, and one of the notes I made too was around thinking about operational overlap can be valuable too. A lot of companies, historically, a lot of companies paying for security, it's like buying insurance. None of us really want to buy insurance, and security sort of aligns to that. But if you can use this data for improving operational value, you get security plus you get some operational pieces. And examples of that I can think of, one would be, if you collect the data, you can do things like, are applications being utilized? Are devices being utilized appropriately? Are the end users actually taking actions they should be, not from a security standpoint, but from an ops standpoint? And that allows your ops team to, increase training or identify if they need to move devices, reallocate devices between sites that are using them versus not using them, which we've definitely seen that happen a lot with a couple of customers. And then, the justification, we've also seen like tying in like value data, like sites that use devices actually have, a 10% lift in sales. And they use that to either help with training or help with either getting justification to go to the CFO and spend more money on these $1,000 handhelds that can add up pretty quickly. But at the end of the day, if you know the value of it, from the ops side, it makes it really easy to get all those other free data on the security side.
Yep. Yeah. And that's definitely, probably most heavily in that bucket we talked about of the usage and utilization. There's a lot of value in that data, of course.
Got it. All right. So just to close, recap the core areas. I think Patrick and I talked through these. When you think about it, think about your tools, get your tools set up. Analytics areas, the first one was usage anomalies. So are different users using it? Are they using it different ways? The second area was the configuration, the compliance anomalies. Are any devices misconfigured? Are the policies not being followed on devices? And the last one is really around networking and network anomalies. Do you have issues where devices are not configured correctly on the network or not behaving correctly on the networks? And then, getting started, I think that's like what Patrick said, don't try to boil the ocean. Just look at what are the basic core pieces you need to protect your highest risk areas. Start with that and really focus on those. Try to move fast, go quickly, and pick the important things, and then create the value around that. Patrick, anything else to add before we wrap up?
No, I think this is a really important conversation. And again, I think one of the cool things about this is it's such a great area where, modern tools like AI can be added to this as you mature your solution. And you start to almost get into a point where things become self-monitoring and pretty cool technology.
Once again, thanks for joining us for this webinar from BlueFletch. If you have questions, please follow up with us at info@bluefletch.com. Thank you.